Welcome everybody to episode 210 of Fergo and the Freak. I'm your host, the Glorious League Freak. And before we get into the podcast, I want to tell you about our major sponsor, which is manscaped.com. If you put in our exclusive code for Fergo and the Freak listeners, which is NRL, you will receive 20% off of your purchase and free delivery. So that's a fantastic deal. Go to manscaped.com. Go and check out the Lawnmower 3.0. It is a fantastic personal grooming device. I highly recommend it. It is something that you should all have if you want to be at your best, you want to be match ready. So go to manscaped.com. Go and put in the promo code NRL and get 20% off of your purchase plus free shipping. Okay, so today, because it's NRL Indigenous round, I thought I would put out my best team of 17 Indigenous players that I've ever seen in my lifetime. Now, it's funny. I started off this list and I thought to myself, this is going to be a lot of fun. And I started putting in players that were kind of locks for their positions. And then I got about 7 plays into it. And it was a nightmare because all of a sudden I'm having to leave out players that, players that I loved watching play the game, some of my favourite players of all time. There's one player in there that I managed to get in the team, but I consider him to be one of the 20 best players I've ever seen play the game, and he couldn't make his position in this side, so I put him on the bench. Keep in mind with this list, I didn't get to see Arthur Beetson play. This is before my time. So this isn't the best team of all time. These are just the best 17 Indigenous Rugby League players that I've seen in my lifetime, that I've seen play the game and that I've enjoyed watching play the game of rugby league. Okay, let's get stuck into it. So at fullback, just couldn't go past Greg Inglis. One of the greatest players of all time. I believe he's an immortal. The things that he has done over the course of his career in so many different positions, at so many different levels, it's just unquestionable. He had to be at fullback. Premiership winner at 2 different clubs, Clive Churchill medalist at a couple of different positions he played. He's been one of the best players, and you could argue at some point in his career, he was the best centre in the world. He was the best fullback in the world. He was the number one choice for 5'8" for Australia at one point. It's just, he's an incredible player, absolutely incredible. I can't wait to see him playing for Warrington next year. I think he might end up back in the NRL the year after that, but we'll see what happens with the pandemic and all that. So he was my fullback. On the wings, and this is probably, I would say that on the wings, this was the most difficult decision of all of them. So my first winger that I chose was Josh Adokar. And I guess this comes down to personal preference as to what sort of winger you like to see. I love wingers that are, number one, fast. Number 2, are just natural try scorers, like they can sniff out a try. And number 3, you don't have to worry about defensively. And Adokar, he covers all of those bases. He is the fastest human being I've ever seen in person. I went to see the test match at the end of 2019 down in Wollongong between Australia and New Zealand, and there was a ball that he scooped up and ran away with, and it was, watching him run, it was like, oh, it's going to be a try. Oh my goodness, what's going on here? It was quite incredible to see a human being run that fast. It was amazing. So I picked him on one wing. I think by the end of his career, he's going to have so many test appearances, origin appearances, just general appearances in the NRL and tries that, you know, he's going to be right up there with all of the all-time greats, and I would consider him to be one of the best Indigenous players I've seen on the wing. The other wing, I chose Wendell Sailor. Wendell Sailor, he really changed the way that wingers were perceived for a long time. A very big dude, but that had the speed, had the defensive ability, had the skills that you want from a winger, try scorer, all of that. He was really the first winger I can think of that the meters that he was making, and definitely in the middle of the field, were so apparent to everybody in the game that everyone started to look to get big wingers. and kind of went away in some respects from getting just, fast try scorers. They started to look for just big wingers. The thing about Wendell Sailor was he was a try scorer as well. And so I couldn't leave him out. I'll talk about some of the other players that didn't make those wing positions because you have to, but they were my two wingers, Josh Adokar and Wendell Sailor. In the centres, it was pretty easy for me. Meninga, who, just one of the all-time great players, 4 Kangaroo Tours, one of the greats of Queensland Rugby League, one of the greats of Australian Rugby League, one of the greats of all time. Not too many centres like Meninga, just so big and strong. I mean, he really, when he was playing the game, it was like there was a forward out there. He was so huge and it just couldn't go past him. He was also a goal kicker and just one of the all-time greats. It's really, he's one of those positions where it's like, Meninga, of course. The other centre that I selected was Steve Ranoff, one of the all-time great attacking players. I used to, when I was running around playing footy at school, I used to say I was Steve Ranoff. I wore a headgear because of Steve Ranoff. Give him just a sniff of a bit of open space and it was game over. He was also one of those players that if he got into a half break and he had defence in front of him, he always seemed to be one of those players that chose the right player to pass it to. He very rarely stuffed up a half break for his team. Natural try scorer, one of the first picked for Queensland and Australia for so many years. I don't know that we've seen too many just flat-out attacking centres like him since. And one of my favourite players of all time, Steve Ranoff. So I picked him. So it's Meninga and Ranoff in the centres for me. 5/8, Laurie Daly, one of New South Wales' greatest ever players, a real leader, great for the Canberra Raiders as well. Pretty easy selection for me. There were times in his career where he was a little bit injury prone, which was a little bit unfortunate, but overall, his performances at rep level, especially for New South Wales, were just undeniable. And I thought that he was a pretty straightforward selection there, although there was another player in my 17 who pushed him pretty close. Halfback, Jonathan Thurston. How can he go past JT? One of Australian Rugby League's greatest ever players, no doubt about that. One of the best halfbacks of all time, goal kicker, never take his dummy. He's going to run at the line and he's going to dummy. Never ever take it, because if he did, it was all over. He was breaking through the line and he was going to set someone up for a try. Fantastic kicking game. Won a premiership, won 2 premierships actually. Won with the Canterbury Bulldogs. I believe he gave his premiership winning medal or his ring to Steve Price, who was either injured or suspended for that grand final win, and then went up to North Queensland on big money and delivered. Won them a premiership. Fantastic player, one of the ornaments of the game and one of the nicest dudes as well. Now, into the forwards. At prop, when you can't pick Arthur Beetson, it's a little bit difficult because I didn't see Arthur Beetson play. The first player I picked at prop was Andrew Fafita. Big guy, big engine, can play a lot of minutes for somebody his size. Really nice ball handling skills, good offload. And the thing about him too is he has really good footwork. And so you've got a player that really has such a good all-round game as a forward because he's got the size that he can just play that, straightforward, hit-up game. But then he can also use his footwork to try and, get his opposition centres off and look for that offload. Fantastic player. Played well for New South Wales. Probably hasn't played as many games for New South Wales as he should have, but he's been a little bit unlucky with injuries, and then there's been sometimes his form just hasn't quite been there when it's time to play for New South Wales. But he was basically the first prop I selected. The second prop position was really difficult. I went with Ryan James. Really reliable player when he plays the game. Extremely injury prone, unfortunately. But he's a very good forward when he plays the game. And the other proposition, there wasn't anybody that really stood out, so I kind of went with Ryan James there. At hooker, I was going to cheat at hooker and pick more of a utility player, but I thought, better not. So I went with Nathan Peets. Very good player. He's up there playing for the Gold Coast. I really like Peets as a player. I think that he could very well be the starting hooker on a lot of different teams in the NRL, and he'd do a really good job for them. He's got a good running game, and he's just a solid hooker, so I selected him. Second row, I went with Gordon Talis as one second row. Talis was one of the great hard ball runners in the game, one of the first pick for Queensland and Australia. His performances for Queensland are almost the stuff of legend. Really fantastic player. Played for St George when he first came into the game. It was really weird. I remember when he first started playing the game, and they used to call him a super sub because he'd come off the bench with his hard ball running, and then he sat out for a year, moved up to the Brisbane Broncos, and the rest is history. The other second rower I selected was Sam Thaiday. For a number of years there, Sam Thaiday was one of the first selected for Queensland and Australia in the back row. Really fantastic player. Once again, a big dude that had a nice little bit of footwork. And the thing I always liked about Sam Thaiday is he always tore in. Like, he never held back when he was playing the game. It was just awesome to watch him play. Played really well for Queensland. Broke my heart a number of times when he played for Queensland. But then he took that same sort of form up to test level as well. And I always love that when you see a player that performs. I mean, he was a great club player, Sam Thaiday. And he seemed to step up another level at Queensland, and then he'd step up another level for Australia. And you listen to English Rugby League fans talk about Sam Thaiday in particular, and they loved him. And there's a reason, because he used to kick their ass quite a lot. So I picked Talis and Thaiday in the back row. My lock, I went with Wade Graham. A bit of a tough decision, this one. There are a few players that I was tossing up here. I went with Graham because, once again, a little bit injury prone, unfortunately, but just so skillful. He could probably be a 5'8", really, in terms of his skill set, but he's big enough to play in the back row. We see him now playing for the Sharks. He's not playing in a good team, but he's by far and away their best player. So, there's something to be said about a player that, even if he's in not a great team, he still looks a cut above everyone else. Always one of those players that when New South Wales picks him, it's like he adds another dimension to their attack. And you kind of know that when he's selected by New South Wales at Queensland, it's like, oh man, we're going to have to deal with Wade Graham. So I went with Wade Graham at lock. Now, my bench. It is a bench of players that I couldn't leave out. I initially wasn't going to select a bench, but there were some players I just couldn't leave out of naming this team. So the very first one is Matthew Bowen, one of the 20 best players of all time I've seen. His skill set was, I think, underrated. His passing game was fantastic. His kicking game was very good. His footwork is about the best I've ever seen in the game. It's kind of between probably him and Benji Marshall in terms of backs for their footwork. Fantastic player for North Queensland Cowboys, one of the most exciting players I've ever seen play the game. Just a sensational, talented player. Unfortunate that Greg Inglis was ahead of him, but I had to pick Matty Bowen in there somewhere. The next player on the bench that I selected was the one and only Preston Campbell. Preston Campbell, a Dally M winner with the Sharks, played for the Gold Coast team a couple of times, was a legend up there in Gold Coast Rugby League. He came to the Penrith Panthers at a time when we really needed someone to do a lot of the playmaking and kicking duties, and he stepped in and took over that playmaking role, and I think was actually underrated in terms of the what he added to the Panthers team. Craig Gowell got a lot of the a lot of the media behind him and, oh man, Craig Gower's playing great. I think it was Preston Campbell that was our chief playmaker in that team and really was the reason that we had a premiership winning team in 2003. It was so cool to see him win that premiership too. It was fantastic. So I had to pick Preston Campbell in there. The footwork, the running game, he was a nightmare for opposition teams, especially late in the game when forward packs were starting to get a little bit tired and Preston Campbell would just take over and, oh man, he was such a fun player to watch. My third bench player, Nathan Blacklock, one of the all-time greatest try scorers in Australian Rugby League history. I used to love watching Nathan Blacklock play the game. He's really the epitome of a pure try scorer, incredible attacking player, could score a try out of nothing. His highlight reel is absolutely ridiculous. And, you just got to look at the try scoring list. He's right up there. Should have played a bunch of games for New South Wales. Should have played more games for Australia. It's unfortunate he didn't. And just one of my favourite players of all time. And I had to get him in this list somewhere. I put him probably just behind Josh Addo-Carr because I think Addo-Carr's a little bit better defensively, but not by much. I thought that a lot of the criticism of Blacklock's defence was just unwarranted, quite honestly. I'm talking about the absolute elite of the elite here, and I had to leave someone out on the wings, and unfortunately it was Blacklock. My last bench player, another player that was like, I got to get him here in this team somewhere. Cliffy Lyons. Nothing short of a magician. I bet Cliff Lyons could probably run out in a rugby league field right now and put someone in for a try. A great player for the, I guess you'd call them the Manly Seagulls. Did he play for the Northern Eagles? Was he gone before then? I can't quite remember. But anyway, one of the great players for the Manly Seagulls. Great in the 80s and 90s. I think people forget how great he was in the 80s. Played for New South Wales, played for Australia. Just one of those players that you could probably put him out anywhere on the footy field and he would have done a job for you. I put him in the same class as someone like, earlier in his career, someone like a Greg Alexander, who by the end of his career, we thought of Alexander as just a halfback and we thought of Cliff Lyons as just 5'8", because they played so well in those positions. But earlier in their careers, they had so much utility value, especially at rep level. I love Cliff Lyons. I got to meet Cliff Lyons one day. I was so super excited. I completely fangirled out, and I got his autograph on a couple of his cards, his footy cards, and the only thing I had was like a green texter for him to sign them with. So the autographs are completely faded now. You can barely see them, but a real highlight meeting Cliff Lyons. It was so cool. So that's my 17. I'll go through it again, and then I want to talk about a couple of players that I couldn't name in the team, unfortunately. So from 1 to 17, my best Indigenous players I've ever seen in my lifetime. Greg Inglis, Josh Addo-Carr, Mal Meninga, Steve Ranoff, Wendell Saylor, Laurie Daly, Jonathan Thurston, Andrew Fafita, Nathan Peets, Ryan James, Gordon Talis, Sam Thaiday, Wade Graham, and then on the bench I had Matthew Bowen, Preston Campbell, Nathan Blacklock, and Cliff Lyons. Now, some of the players that missed out that I want to talk about. David Peachy, one of my favourite players of all time. Once again, one of those players that you put in the category of just being nothing short of a magician. The way he would run the ball back from fullback and just like he didn't ever look like he was sprinting. He just looked like he glided across the ground. And when he made a break, like you couldn't catch him. He was one of those just magical players. I loved watching him play. And he feels like one of those players that he's just not playing. You know, he's always going to be that David Peachy to me that is just unstoppable when he's on form. Ken Nagas, another great player who, you know, with him and Noah Nandruku in the 90s, on the wings for Canberra. I know Nidrugu was a Fijian, but Ken Nagas was the other winger, and he was a great player. I loved watching him play. Ricky Walford, who was a stalwart for St George in the 90s, he was a very good player. Anthony Mundine, when he was in form, he was fantastic. He was a great player to watch play. I almost picked Sam Backo. I just got to see a little bit of Sam Backo's career, not much of it. I almost picked him at prop. It was a very close run thing. Dean Witters, another player. He was another one of those players that he played in the back row, but he had a lot of skill. A little bit like Wade Graham in that he had a bit of playmaking ability, really good footwork for a dude his size as well. George Rose, another great player who, it was funny. I remember when George Rose come onto the scene and people were like, man, this dude, needs to lose a bit of weight. Man, it was part of his game. Shut up. It was part of his game. It made him great. I loved that about him. And he was a really good player. I just wanted to put out the best Indigenous team I've ever seen play the game. It's a great round of footy. We get to see the Indigenous jerseys come out. I love seeing all of the different designs and, the different colours that are used on the Indigenous jerseys for different teams. They really pop. They look so cool. So I kind of like seeing the different designs and seeing what teams come up with. So really enjoy this round of footy. So yeah, I thought I would put that out. Little podcast, just a quick one. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any disagreements, keep in mind, I'm not saying this is the best team ever or anything. It's just the best I think I've seen. If you've got any teams you want to put forward, feel free to email us, podcast@leaguefreak.com. Check out the website, fergoandthefreak.com. Go to our Patreon pages. Andrew's Patreon page is patreon.com/RLproject. My Patreon page is patreon.com/leaguefreak with no space there. You can get the top 3 tiers. You get free merch after you've signed up for 3 months. So, and any donations you can make, they're fantastic. A big shout out to our sponsors, manscaped.com. Go to manscaped.com, put in the promo code NRL. It is exclusive to Fergo and Freak listeners. Put in NRL and get 20% off your purchases and free shipping. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. They have just the best products. You should go and have a look at manscaped.com right now. You can actually click on the description of this podcast and it takes you right there. But make sure you put in that promo code because not only do you get 20% off, it lets them know that we sent you. So thank you for listening to Fergo and the Freak. Enjoy Indigenous round in the National Rugby League and we will be talking to you very soon.